doesn't really adequately describe what they're about, because you can have hunter-gatherer nomads like Aboriginal people in Australia. You can have pastoral nomads like the Maasai, or anybody who's taking, you know, a flock of sheep or a herd of cattle or whatever. They're moving with their animals, so they're pastoral nomads. Or you have what the category that's usually just used to describe not just travellers but Romany Chals in Britain and a lot of Roma across Europe as well, which is commercial nomadism. And I suppose the difference with commercial nomadism is that it assumes a relationship between a nomadic population and a settled population. Because if you're a commercial nomad, you have to be, if you're tinsmithing, you have to be selling your tinsmithing work to somebody, and that's a, you know, for want of a better description, that's a settled population or a peasant class that isn't moving, so you're moving as a nomad. So it's already a symbiotic, at its best anyway, a symbiotic relation, a positive relationship where the settled population want what the nomads are providing, and the nomads obviously want to sell that back to them. So, you know, those different forms of nomadism, whether they've all been in there in history, create very different dynamics for the populations that are exercising them. And, you know, the classic example is that, you know, for Australian Aboriginal people, the settler colonial population did nothing for them. It just genocided their culture essentially. But if you're a commercial nomad, you have a more complex symbiotic relationship with the settled population, and that, you know, it begins to give you some flavor of the difference. But at the end of the day, you know, there's no question that the way that you're coming at that question is the right one. It's like, well, where did the settled population in Ireland come from, and what are the implications of understanding that history?
Yeah.
And yeah, and we've a fair idea where they're coming from. I mean, you described it yourself. If you took you were describing it in the 1880s, for example. We could start there and say, you're saying the Land Acts, which redistributed land to create a kind of settled peasantry.
Yeah.
Well, one of the reasons they're doing that is that didn't exist. We had landlords and we had tenantry on the land before that. Yeah. And actually, if you take another step back and go to the famine time, roughly around the famine, just before the famine, we have landlords, but then we have large sections from Ulster and then across into the west of Ireland and down the west coast and into Cork and everywhere. We have a huge population, as you know, about 9 million people, but a huge Gaelic-speaking, still culturally Gaelic population. And we don't actually have, especially in my area and in these areas in the northwest, we don't have houses as such left over from that time. We don't have them because in the 17th century, when the English started to English and Irish English culture began to spread out of the Pale, the cottages that are now regarded as traditional were actually called English houses because they were stone rectangular houses, and this is not what anyone in Ireland lived in. So if we keep taking a step back, so before the famine, we won't find anything except in the East Counties. I'm not speaking for all of Ireland, but I'd say in most of the Gaelic zones, we won't find things like high kitchen tables and stone houses and big dressers or anything like this. This kind of thing didn't exist because this isn't how Irish people lived. If we take another step back into the 18th century, what happens gradually is that we have less and less evidence of what we would now call settled people.
Yes.
In terms of physically, this is if in archaeology, and also we would say psychologically in terms of what Bernard's said. I think he's right to have the dividing line, of course, on mentality. Yeah. This was always the struggle that the English colony had in Ireland, was struggle of mentalities, if you want to put it that way. Yeah. For example, a lot of the old laws, the English anti-Gaelic costume laws, anti-Gaelic language, things like this, mostly were directed at their own colonists. Yes. Originally in Kilkenny and everywhere, and for that reason, as we would say, is mainly because what they're trying to stop is Gaelicization of their settled community that pays taxes and what have you, who had this terrible habit of keeping on going to Gaelic brehons and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Now, so what we would say simply is that looking for settled people is in sense of mentality wise, and that is that we actually see the great expansion of it is that it is from the conquest in the 1600s onward, and that the modern settled, you described one step on the way there, if you know what I mean, which was the 1880s.
Yeah.
However, the mentality is older than that. Obviously, the mentality, if we keep going back in time, that mentality is going to be not spread across the country. It's going to be one that's indistinguishable from the mentality that Bernard describes of travellers and other Gaelic people across most of the country. And then if we go right back to, say, 1530, we'll find that it's only around the Pale, and it's only in the cities like Kilkenny, the walled towns like Kilkenny, Cork and Galway. Yeah. And inside them, we'd have a recognisable settled world, as we would call it now. But outside...
Sorry, I mean, I completely agree. I think the point is that if we could time travel back to the even Gorton Moor, but there would be nothing. The peasant class that was the vast majority of people in Ireland at that time looked nothing like settled people. That's absolutely true. So it's a much more fluid society. The relationship to the land is completely different. So on that basis, you know, your thesis is absolutely right. So that you know that. We begin to trace what are the implications of that. It's a new 19th century phenomenon. I mean, I know obviously there's a colonial imposition that you're talking about, but the point at which becomes adopted by the mass, if you like, of Irish people, it's a 19th century phenomenon, and then it's copper fastened, as I suggested before, by the emergence of the 26 county state in 1922, and it suddenly assumes that this is what Irish people should look like.